This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Canada Reads American Style. Tara here today, and I have a special guest with me, Susan Wadds. Hello, Susan.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited for this. So first, let's do a little bio. So winner of the Writers Union of Canada's Prose contest in 2016, Susan Wadds' award-winning work has appeared in The Blood Pudding, Room, Quagmire, Waterwheel Review, Funicular, Wow Women on Writing, and many more. The first two chapters of her debut novel, What the Living Do, which is what we're here to discuss today, published by Regal House Publishing earlier in 2024, won the Lazuli Group's Prose contest and were published in Azure Magazine. A graduate of the Humber School for Writers, Susan is a certified Amherst Writers and Artists workshop facilitator. She lives on a quiet river in south central Ontario with an odd assortment of humans and cats. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you.
We're here to discuss your debut book, What the Living Do. For those who haven't read it yet, could you tell us a little bit about the book itself and maybe also the title, where the title came from?
Yeah, the title is pretty much, the title is perfect. It comes from a Marie Howe's poem, What the Living Do. It's about living an ordinary life and remembering the loved one who's passed on. It's hard to go on living, but that's what the story is about, really, how to live as the living do when dying seems an easier choice. What the Living Do is a story about a woman whose chosen work has given her the opportunity to come to terms with the deaths of her family, which she feels responsible for. When she's diagnosed with cancer, she's torn between letting it have her and sticking around to actually live and possibly love. She's a road worker charged with cleaning up roadkill, a job she imbues with meaning and possibly answers to life itself, consciously or unconsciously. Although she's deeply loved by a man nearly 11 years her junior, she keeps him at arm's length, perhaps consciously because that gives her a sense of control, and unconsciously because she feels she isn't worthy of being loved. This story is about a 37-year-old woman deadened by grief trying to figure out what the living do.
That's beautiful. That's a great description of it. Really is. Brett, our main character, works in a field that is traditionally held by men, a road worker. Why did you choose this field for her, this job?
Well, I'd like to talk about something called a sacred image, which a theater teacher, Sherry Coleman, also a writing mentor, Sherry Coleman talks the sacred image. And looking for a character to tell this story, I was really struck by women on road crews. And usually they're the ones holding stop signs, stop, slow. And it was one of those writers, what if she wasn't just a sign holder? What if she was working with the men? What if she was down and dirty? And I really like the idea of putting a woman in a non-traditional woman's role, and not just as a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, but something a little bit grittier, because I needed her to be, or at least to think, that she's tough. She believes that she's tough. And that seemed to work for the character that I wanted to create. So she couldn't just wear a suit. She needed to be self-reliant. And this is, again, with this character, there's a lot of things that she thinks she is, but she isn't really. So that's kind of why I put her in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in addition to Brett, your novel is populated with like a wonderful cast of characters. And one of them is Mel, one of her co-workers, who she feels very close to, in that it's almost the only person she wants to work with. She even says at one point that his silence grounds her. Could you discuss like her need? I felt like it was a need to work with Mel and to have his silence around her.
Yeah, well, Mel is the only one who asks nothing of her, right? And she doesn't really feel she has anything to give. So he's to her, so on him, because he's quiet, she can project everything that she thinks she needs. You might have noticed that she really projects what his answers mean, and she has an idea that he's incredibly wise, and yeah, essentially that he doesn't ask anything of her. My ex is Indigenous, he's Ojibwe, and my son is. So I've been embedded in that culture for quite some time. And everything that Mel says and the things he tells her, if we talk about that, about the skunks and everything, is a story that came down through my son's lineage. So I wanted to honor that as well. And also my my own personal Indigenous romanticism was I gave that to her
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted to highlight that, we don't really know what it is that we think about people of another culture. We just have an idea. But essentially, back to your question, is that for her, Mel is safe. He's absolutely safe, and he asks nothing of her.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to what you said about what she needs, because she would even ask questions of him, and sometimes he wouldn't even answer her questions. And she would read something into his answers. And I even think at one point he gave her raspberry tea as a gift from his wife, and he didn't know why, but she had a whole story behind it. And it was that we, in the end, it was a much simpler question than she was reading into it. But I really loved their relationship. Do you want to tell us about the skunk?
Many years ago, one of actually, I think it was, I don't think it was my son's father. I think it was his second cousin. But anyway, told the story of that lineage, that the great, exactly as it's told in the story. I don't know how many greats it was, but it was at the time of the Spanish flu when that particular reservation was really hit hard by the flu, and a lot of children were dying. And this ancestor said, go trap a skunk, and to the husband, and he did, and she made a tea, and nobody died, nobody got sick. And what's really, and so I put that in there because it's no spoiler that Brett finds out she has cancer quite early on in the story. So when they're shoveling roadkill and there's the skunk juice, that's when Mel tells her this story that it can heal you. So it's interesting because at a launch I did out in Victoria, the fellow who was my chat person, my MC, when he was getting ready to talk to me in the launch, he he did the research and found out, which I didn't even know, it's a thing. It really is a thing, and it's a yeah, it's a thing that particularly popular in Indigenous cultures, that they do use the skunk to heal various ills. So who knew? I just thought it was lore, but it was really fun to use that in my story, to have Brett, go chasing after skunks to try and heal herself, as she's resisting everything traditional to heal her. She will go and roll around in skunk tang.
This isn't something I've prepared you for, but it also reminds me at one point she had asked Mel how she prays to animals, because animals are pervasive and they're important to the story and to Brett herself. And she asked Mel how she prays to animals. Do you want to discuss his response? Because I loved this moment.
Yeah, because she's thinking that he's like, her projection at that moment is that he's praying to the animal, like to ask for something. And he's saying, no, no, you pray for them. You give thanks, and thanks for their life. And so again, it's a flipping the perception of what praying is, that it's not asking for something, it's offering something. And that's pretty much his teaching in that moment. But for him, it's just like, no, we're not praying to the animals. We're praying for them, because that comes very early I think in the very first chapter, because she's carrying the weight of the deaths of her family for which she feels responsible. And so in the dead, she's looking for answers. Maybe Mel has an answer. How do I go on living? How do I manage this? Maybe it's praying, maybe it's looking at the entrails of dead dogs on the road, and that sort of looking in all the wrong places kind of thing. But that prayer, which she eventually learns kind of how to do, and what its purpose is, which is essentially to just give thanks.
Yeah. Brett is also, in addition to being a road worker, she is a writer. She compares herself to, among others, Virginia Woolf, and wonders if she will ever have the courage to tell her story. Does she? Does she have the courage? Does she tell her story?
She won't write it. I don't think she'll ever come to that, but she does, as you know, because you've read the book, she does tell her story. Your question, I saw your question there, and I thought about in the past how, George Sand, George Eliot just changed their names so that they could get published. And I like our current situation where most agents are women, most writers, all the people I write with, all the people I read I
Mhm.
mostly read women. We're just putting out amazing books of all kinds, and I don't know, but I'm assuming that lots of people in the big five publishing industry are also women. So I think we can tell our stories, because that was one of the questions that you had offered me was, how do you view women in the writing world now? And I think, it's our time. It's our time to tell our stories, and we have to tell our stories, however that shows up. I love how our stories can be told in, fantasy, or, whatever, any kind of genre, and still get the story out that we really need to tell. It doesn't need to be just, plain. But I write with women every day. Pretty much, I have like 4 or 5 workshops a week that I host, and the women are telling their stories, and I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And there's so many different ways of doing it.
Well, that's what I also, because I also read a lot of female writers as well. And I think our stories don't need to be pretty anymore in order to be published, or romantic. Like your story, I told you offline that it's very visceral. Like Brett's story is visceral. It has a physical vibe to it, and it's not always pretty. But
No,
that, it needs to be told. And you're telling, like, it's a beautiful story that's being told.
thank you.
And in addition, through Brett's story and her relationship with her best friend, you also get into reproductive rights, the rights of infertility issues, the rights of a woman to make her choice, which is something I didn't see this story going to when it first started, but I loved the conversation that she would have, the relationship with her best friend, because it was complicated at times.
Yeah, they kind of didn't become friends for a while.
Mhm.
How Brett conflates having had an abortion with having a miscarriage, and her friend kind of goes ballistic. It's
Yeah.
like, you don't get it. It's not the same. To Brett, it was the same. She didn't get that at all, because her abortion wasn't easy. It wasn't something she really wanted to do, but in her circumstances, it just wasn't tenable to have that child. So yeah, the friendship is, again, people always ask me how much of this story is based on my life, and I think that the membrane between fiction and memoirs can sometimes be very thin. But it's not my story, but there is an element of in that particular friendship where my friend wasn't having miscarriages, but she couldn't conceive, and I didn't want a baby, and I got pregnant. So, you know, and I actually at one point I thought I was having twins, and I thought I had this idea that I could give one to her. So, which is ridiculous. Anyway, so that kind of informed, it's as you know, that's not the story that I wrote, but that idea was definitely informed how I wrote their relationship and how they came back together. Yeah, and also you have to have the voice of reason, right? You have to have the voice of reason in a story, especially when your character's going off the rails. Somebody's got to try and set them straight, whether successfully or not. So that was also Nora's role
Yeah.
in the story.
What future projects? Are you any future projects, current projects you're working on that you would like to share with us?
I'd love to, because yeah, I mean, this story was finished in 2016. So although I adore it, it's it's a past lover, and my current lovers are one that I have been working on for 15 years. That I'm really, it has gone through so many iterations, and characters have come and gone, and its working title is called Performance, about a choreographer, a modern dancer, whose her main thing is to try and create this authentic, perfect, true dance, and her husband is charged with molesting their babysitter. So she's torn. She wants to make this authentic dance, but she's torn between loyalty and believing the girl who has been known to be a liar. She's lied about many things, so that's the hook there, that she can't quite get behind the fact that her nice husband has done that. So that's the story that I'm very urgently trying to get completely polished up to send off. And I also have a new project that's very exciting to me, about a 51-year-old woman who's had a double lung and heart transplant, and the organs belong to a 25-year-old man, and the organs have retained consciousness and they want out. So that's the story.
I can't wait to read both. So no pressure, but
I think I need pressure. I need the deadline. I'm
okay,
kind of.
I'll send you weekly pressure emails then, just to keep you on track, because those both sound stories that I'm very interested in. I would love to hear them from your perspective as a writer.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
great to hear. Thank you. I hope
yeah,
everybody feels that way. I just
they
need
will.
I need an agent, because this book, I this was this was on submission for literally years. It almost got picked up a couple of times. It fell through cracks. It did get picked up. After a year, it couldn't be sold. It was a long journey, and I eventually went with an independent press, very wonderful, two women in Raleigh, Regal House Publishing, and they didn't require an agent. But as most independent presses, they required me to do pretty much all the footwork in the marketing and promotion, and
Yeah,
it's been a lot. I'm very grateful to Holly Gatteret of River Street Writing that introduced us to each other.
yeah,
But I'm just I'm just hoping that I can get an agent that will do some of the work for me
yeah.
with these new books. That's my hope.
Yeah, because I think as readers, we don't realize, we all know, well, we should all realize how difficult writing a book is. But we don't understand how, I don't think, understand how difficult the next step, like getting that book published, is. Can you talk a bit about the process of finding a publisher? You touched on it a minute ago, but
Yeah. Well, it was a long, winding road, that's for sure. I did not ever want to go the self-publishing route, just because I really wanted that sort of stamp of approval that someone else thought it was worthy of publication.
yeah.
And also because it's a literary book, I didn't really see it fitting into the kind of self-publishing world. I
Mhm.
didn't know how to promote it that way. So, I started out with all the Canadian agents that I adore. Carly Waters is now like super. She's a superstar now. When I first contacted her, she was pretty new, because, as I say, this was 15 years ago, and she was very kind, but didn't she gave me quite a bit of personal feedback, but didn't take it. The other agent that was absolutely marvelous was Hilary McMahon of Westwood. She even read a rewrite. She was kind enough to do that. Said very nice things about my writing, but no, she didn't want to take it. So I went through the whole gamut of of agents in Canada. Then I signed up for something called Writer's Relief in the States, that you do a whole questionnaire and send sample chapters, whatever, and they give you up to, I think it was like 50 agents to submit to, along with exactly how to submit to each one of these agents, how many chapters and how they wanted their queries done. So I did that, and suddenly I'm there with 50. So I spent several days sending out those queries, and I got a few requests for full manuscript, and one in New York took it. She signed me, and as I said earlier, after a year she couldn't sell it. I don't think she really understood the book somehow. Like, there wasn't. So I sent her another book that I had written, which is totally shelved now, but and she didn't like it, so that's fine. We parted ways, and off again I was. And that's when I started querying smaller presses that didn't require an agent. One in Canada, I won't mention them, but they were very nice and said, oh, this is really great. Are you Indigenous? We noticed that there was an Indigenous character in the first pages. Are you Indigenous? And I said, well, no, I'm not. But I explained my story. For 30 years, this has been my world. I'm not Indigenous, but my son is, my ex is, the community is right there. And they said, oh, that's nice. And they didn't take it. So that was that. And then finally, Barbara Krasner, a fellow Amherst Writers and Artists facilitator, suggested Regal House because someone who's also a facilitator, Maureen Buchanan Jones, had published with them. And after quite a bit of back and forth, a video call, they wanted to make sure that I would be the person to do the marketing and promotion, like, how much will you do, kind of thing. I had to really convince them. So I told them, I said, I don't know how to do this, but once, a long time ago, a therapist told me I was counterphobic, which meant that if I'm afraid, I just jump right in. So they really like that. I'm terrified, but I'm going to do it. And so that's what I've been doing. And they did. So they accepted my book in October of 2021, and it was published in March of this year. So that was, again, another long stretch.
Wow. Yeah.
That's why my relationship with this book, it's like a renewed one. It was finished so long ago. And then when people are asking me about it, I'm like, oh yeah. I remember that.
You're revisiting an old friend.
Yes. Oh, yes. And it's true because, okay, so she lives in Barrie. She lives in Barrie. She's my friend Brett.
Yeah.
So I live about an hour away from Barrie, and a couple of years ago, I was driving down Collier Street, and I looked at the building where I always imagined she lived, and I felt suddenly really sad that I couldn't go see her. Couldn't see if she was home. I thought, wow, that's like, it was a genuine wave of sadness that she didn't actually exist.
No, I would believe that, not as a writer, but even last week I was camping just outside of Barrie, and on my way home, well, not outside, maybe an hour or so away, but as we drove through Barrie on our way home, I'm like, oh, this is Brett's home. I was like, it's not. I'm like, but I had finished the book just days before leaving. So in my head, she is now connected with Barrie as well.
Oh, that's great. I love that. I love that so much.
Offline, you had mentioned your body work that you do. How does your body work? Could you explain to us how your body work informs your writing?
Yeah, it's when I'm writing a scene, I always go in to feel how my body would respond in such a situation. And, I read bodies for 30 odd years. I've been reading bodies. And I mean, I'll just tell you that I'm not just a massage therapist. I studied in India, in the 80s and 90s. The training that I did is called rebalancing, therapeutic rebalancing work, and it was extremely experiential and had a lot of emotional release work, psychotherapeutic work in the body. So this deep interconnection of emotions, memory, body. The body can't lie. The mind does a real good job at it, but the body can't lie. So this is what I learned there, and of course that's going to inform my writing, because yeah, it's part of it's just how I write. That's where the words come from. They come from the body. Yeah.
Yeah. I am so glad you said that, because now seeing like Brett's journey in this book, I can see how her history, what was bothering her, what she had to work through, was coming through in her body too throughout the book.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So people get very frustrated with her because, come on, make a decision, do something, do something. And in the end, we find out that there are a couple of reasons why she's not aware of it, but her body is telling her, no, no, don't do this thing.
Yeah.
Don't do this thing. There's something coming. So yeah, I'm glad you caught that.
Yeah. I want to spoil it for readers but I'm not going to. I'm not going to. You really have to read the book, because there's something else in Brett's story that you don't see coming, and how she handles it. And yeah, it's really very cool part of the story. I don't want to ruin it though, but I do, but I'm not going to. You also hinted at writing workshops. So we're going to put a link to your website in our show notes, because you also offer writing workshops.
I do. And I thank COVID for that. No, I was doing them before. I was certified in 2014 and have been leading the workshops ever since. Before, I was doing approximately one evening a week and one full day a month. And now, since COVID, I do 5, 6 online workshops a week, the very occasional in-person ones. And I have a retreat coming up. We went last year to this amazingly beautiful place in Spain, in Andalusia, and it was so gorgeous that we're going back. So I'm leading a gentle yoga and writing retreat in Spain in May of next year, and that's of course in person.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the writing, that's the beauty now, is that writing has become my livelihood. I used to do up to 20 bodywork sessions in a week, and now I do about 5, because I can write. And the thing about the AWA method, I'll tell you this, just so it's clear to people, that one of the reasons why I really love the method is that the facilitator is required to write along with the participants. We take the same risks. So that means that 5, 6 times a week for 2 hours at a time, I'm writing. I'm also listening and reading and giving feedback, but it means that whether I like it or not, I have to keep writing and I have to get my book done.
Before we say goodbye, could you share some of what you are currently reading, what you have read, some of your favorite books, whatever you want to share? I just love hearing what others are reading.
Well, I like to read different things. So right now I'm reading, I think it's Ann Patchett's Hello Beautiful. It was an Oprah's thing.
Yeah.
That's a very different kind of book. It's it's very different. It's somehow, again, very quiet. Like there's not a lot happening in this book, which I like. Like Amor Towles does that very well too. You think about A Gentleman in Moscow, and he's just watching, like he's eating and drinking and whatever, but he's not really doing much. But he's just watching anyway. So I'm reading that, Hello Beautiful. I'm reading also Emily DeAngelis's The Stones of Burren Bay, which is a YA book, and it's just recently released, and Gwen Tuinman's Unrest, and it's historical fiction. So it's just trying to broaden my scope and get different little pieces of how people are writing and what's popular these days. It's funny because I like quiet books that that take me deep. For instance, I adore Ann Patchett and
Mhm.
Tom Lake, which a lot of people have sort of criticized because it's boring. But I think it's lovely. It's just lovely. And it was such a perfect way to talk about, the what COVID could, or what at least the lockdown could do for a family. Anyway, so those are some of the things that I've been reading and am reading these days.
Beautiful.
I usually have 2 or 3 books on the go.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I like to have usually a fiction and a nonfiction. That's how I usually have mine.
Right, and also Story Genius. I'm also reading Story Genius because that's a good craft book.
Oh, okay, that's good because my oldest has aspirations to be a writer. So I'm going to tell her about that one too, Story Genius.
By Lisa Cron, Cron, Cron.
Thank you. Awesome. Okay, thank you so much for joining us, Susan. I look forward to reading whatever you write in the future and hope that I'm open invitation to join us whenever you would like.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It was fun. It's nice meeting you.
Okay, thank you, listeners, and happy reading. Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.